So Okarun has special powers as stated in chapter 180 of Dandadan, and it's a bit more complicated of course, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. We also found the culprit behind the Jiangshi vampires, the differences between the Kazuka blades, and also more hints towards who's the blackmailer. So we have a lot to discuss, but of course we're gonna start from the top. So the title of the chapter is The Owner of the Kazuka Knives, and it pretty much picks up with the squad seemingly using Yokishiro as bait to find out who the blackmailer is. Kinta then whispers that movement has commenced, but Momo questioned what happened over the last break, and we see that Kinta is using the glasses he created using a nanotech, and he goes on to say that 3 teachers have already made contact with Yokishiro, but put your mind at ease, we have only just set the bait. Momo then questions which 3 teachers, and this is where it gets somewhat interesting because he goes on to say that one of them is Queen Sensei. She talked to Koiki about everything after what happened, which of course is the entire fiasco with the pygmies. He then says that the next teacher is Miss Adachi. She's pretty much in charge of Class E, and she questioned Koiki about classroom stuff. But then he goes on to say that the next teacher is San Germain. He asked her to tell him what secret she spotted, and this led Momo to say that San Germain is a tad bit suspicious, which he totally is. Now, Okarun then said that he talked to him about what secret he spotted too, which of course is referring to the conversation they had in chapter 169. Though Kinta kinda dismisses this, saying that they should not be hasty and call them amateurs. He then goes on to say that Sanjimi is strange to begin with. He appears and disappears like a phantom. You can't make good guesses if you're stuck on preconceived notions. Also, he didn't say anything about knives or powers, so there is no evidence to conclude that he is the culprit. Now this part is really important because I've seen some people saying that this means that Sanjime isn't the culprit because the characters in the story is telling you that he isn't. And by the way, the logic Kinta uses here makes perfect sense because it's easy to assume that Sanjime is the culprit because he's very strange. But it could just be the case that your preconceived notions about that person is clouding your judgment, which could lead to you missing the actual culprit. So it does make sense, and it could be Tatsu just saying, yeah, I'm seeing all your theories that this guy is the culprit, I'm just gonna let you guys know it's not that easy, okay? And based on what happened in chapter 169, Sanjime did get Okarun to yield to him, so why wouldn't he have stolen his powers if that's what he wanted to do? And based on what happened later on in this chapter, why would he be sending someone else to steal Okarun's powers and have him yield again when he already did? So it's a bit strange, and it does imply that he isn't the mastermind, but we know he's involved because again, he had Okarun yield and he does possess a Kazuka blade. Though I would say that this might be a classic case of misdirection because people have no idea the extent authors will go to throw people off leads and try to get them to not spoil the story. And we saw this back in Naruto when everyone thought that Tobi was Obito, which was Kakashi's friend that gave him one of his Sharingans. Yet the story kept insisting this wasn't the case to the point where they had him literally say that he is Madara and had him know things that only Madara would know, which we later came to find out that that's because Madara faked his death and lived way longer than we thought he did, to the point where he mentored Obito, so that's why Obito knew the things that he did. So in the end, it was revealed that Tobi was indeed Obito, which is Kakashi's friend. And when I say that authors go to crazy extent to hide interesting plot twists, Kishimoto literally broke the mechanics of his universe by having Obito use the abilities of his Mangekyo Sharingan without activating the Mangekyo Sharingan, because everyone would realize that the design of his Mangekyo is the same as Kakashi's, which we just confirmed that he is Kakashi's childhood friend who gave him his Sharingan. So I just want you guys to realize that this doesn't mean anything, and Tatsu could be trying to throw you guys off the scent to hide the fact that Sanjimi is indeed the culprit. And there is something else I need to address in regards to that, but we'll address it when we get to that part in the chapter. Now Ara then removes Kinta's glasses and said, let me see the footage as well, I can't trust your conclusions. And of course Kinta is a bit flustered because a beautiful girl is removing his glasses, and she then notices that the shape of the glasses is somewhat distorted. And Kinta then says, you mustn't do that, young miss. These are made of nanoskin. They change according to the mental images of the person touching them. She's then a bit embarrassed by this because they morphed into the shape of Okarun's glasses, which of course implies that she was thinking about Okarun. She then of course panics and says it doesn't mean that Okarun's on her mind all the time, which Okarun himself replies to by saying that, well, my glasses were right in front of you, so that's probably why you visualize them. But I know it would be the wrong impression, so don't be so, and just before he's able to finish, she says it's not the wrong impression, and she seems a bit embarrassed. Then of course we have Momo in the background being quite annoyed by this conversation. We then switch over to the gym teacher greeting Miss Adachi, which is interesting because we thought this was Mr. Adachi based on the prior chapter, which either implies that it was a mistranslation or there is a Mr. Adachi as well, but I guess we'll see. But he pretty much questioned if she left the school and she said yes, her mom wasn't feeling well, but she's now doing fine. He then remembered that they're having a basketball singles mixer, which is what Sanjime was invited to in the prior chapter, and he pretty much asked her if she wanted to go as well. She then declined, saying that she isn't an athlete, but he goes on to say that it's going to be really laid back. I'm positive you'd have a lot of fun. If you change your mind, let me know. And she replied to that saying, will do. Now as she walked away, we then see that her smile quickly changes to a frown, and she then pulled up her cell phone and it has some messages that says target. Then it mentions the second floor of the restaurant Seiko visited along with the woman in glasses. The reply then says failed, woman wasn't alone, which of course is referring to Payase and Kashimoto. So it appears that Miss Adachi is working with the same people the ox guy described in the prior chapter. And it also then shows that she has control over the Jiangshi vampires, which means that she's one of the guys who attacked Seiko. Now we then switch over to one of the guys that were trying to bully Okarun, and it seems like he's trying to hit on these two girls, or at least that's what he thinks he's doing. So he tries to see what they're doing on their cell phone, and he just happens to glance on a message that says, hasn't Okarun seemed kinda hot recently? Now he's of course shocked by this to some degree and questions if they have a thing for Okarun, and the girls are of course upset that he read the messages and says that he sucks and tries to leave. He then grabs onto one of their hands and says, hang on a sec, can't you tell that I'm just messing around, with a smile on his face. The girl then shrugs him off and tells him not to touch her and calls him a creep. He then shouts after them, calling them as skanks and saying that they're lame, seriously. But he then notices that his other schoolmates are watching him and looking at him funny, so he turns and walks away and says, don't look at me, you plebs, and we see that he's thinking to himself saying, what the hell, I'm so sick of him, which of course is Okarun. He then thinks back to when Okarun beat him during the exercise and goes on to say that ever since he beat him, nothing has been going his way. How can that little twerp be better than me? I won't stand for it. You know, typical bully stuff. Now that's when this gets somewhat interesting because he then pulls out one of the Kazuka blades, the white one specifically, and he remembers something saying, do you want power? And it seems to be a flashback because he's now in different clothing and he says huh, but he doesn't see the person who said it, so he asks his classmates if they said something, but they have no idea what he's talking about. The voice then comes back and says, you're the only one who can hear me, listen up. You wanna beat him, don't you? Try hurting yourself with the white blade, you'll gain special powers. Want me to tell you why he's better than you? That's because he has special powers too. And that's when Hase starts to freak out and he goes on to say, that's right, that's why you're so unlucky right now. Unfair, isn't it? Frustrating even. You need to take his power. He then tells him to use the black knife, which implies that the black one is used to steal powers, but also tells him to be careful. When you use it, make sure you make him accept defeat first. If you don't, you won't be able to steal his powers. Get it? Make him accept defeat first. So this pretty much confirms that the black one is used to take powers while the white one is used to bestow powers. Though I do wonder how the powers transfer between the blades, because if the black one is used to take powers, how does the white one get the powers to begin with? So it will be interesting to see how this plays out eventually, but ISA seems to not believe this because he goes on to say I must be crazy. Why would I ever believe something like that? But he still wants to test it to see if it's some kind of joke, and he goes on to cut himself and nothing happens. So he goes on to laugh and says, I knew it wasn't true, had me going there. Who came up with such an elaborate prank? I'm such an idiot, I completely fell for it. This seriously hurts though. But that's when a spirit or yokai appears behind him, and it seems to be the jumping crone, which is of course interesting because Saint Germain of course used this yokai in his fight versus the fairy tale curse. So how does the blackmailer now possess it to give it to this guy? Well, of course the first assumption would be that the blackmailer is indeed Count Saint Germain. There's also the fact that the power that he's using to talk to him is similar to the power of the fairy tale curse, which he used to manipulate Rin and Zuma, which of course again leads back to Count Saint Germain because he stole the power of the fairy tale curse. So everything seemingly points to Count Saint Germain, but I also want to point out that it could be the case that there are different versions of the jumping crone, as there could be different versions of Turbo Granny over the course of history. So maybe these are old versions or new versions of these curses that just manifested based on different people, of course, meeting their end. So that could also be the case as well, but of course we'll see. Just bear in mind that this once again goes back to the classic case of misdirection, where the author tries to lead the audience in one direction where it should be the opposite. So it being Saint Germain or Saint Germain is way too obvious, and it could be the case that they aren't simply because of that fact, but it could also be the opposite as well, where the author makes it too obvious for it to be these guys. So we believe that it couldn't be these guys, but that ends up being the case either way. But of course, again, we'll see. Now the chapter also implies that Okarun has some powers to steal, which could mean that he did manifest some powers after giving Turbo Granny her powers back. But it could also be the case that these guys have no idea that he no longer possesses that power, and that power is what they're referring to. So it could really go either way, because there's some basis and narrative backing for Okarun having some type of power outside of Turbo Granny, and I explained that in this video on screen. But that's it guys, I'll see you on the next one.